Cavalry come in all shapes and sizes, but no matter what, they're always some of the most impactful units in your army. Whether they're lightning fast and charge in and out of combat, or beefy lads that can box with the best of them, Cav are an essential part of the war machine for so many factions. But which are the units that stand above the rest? The fastest flankers, the chiseled chargers, and the bold boxers? Well, today let's find out as we count down the top 10 cavalry units in Total War Warhammer 3, right after I tell you about Holy Energy faster than some great swords can beat some zombies. And go. Holy Energy is the clean way to enjoy great tasting energy for a low cost of 80 pence per serving. We're talking their new patented new caffeine for slower absorption, meaning a smooth, long-lasting boost instead of a nasty spike of anxiety. We're talking 20 calories per serving. We're talking no sugar, no taurine, or any of that other crap that traditional energy drinks are stuffed full of. And we're talking a great taste using only natural flavors and colors. I've tried almost every flavor, and by far my favorite is Raspberry Raptor. If you're craving fruity refreshment that makes you want to get posted up by the pool, then this is exactly what you're looking for. But if you don't want to take my word for it, then check out their starter set linked in the description below to try every flavor for yourself and get a shaker cup to enjoy in style. And folks, you better start calling me an overexcited Santa Claus because Christmas just came early. You can pick yourself up a starter set or anything else you like, and if you use code Colonel5, you'll get £5 off your first order. And if you can't stop coming back for more, then code Colonel will get you 10% off every single order until the end of time itself. So get on into that description, click the link, and check out Holy Energy to enjoy a tasty beverage and support your boy. Now, how are those zombies doing? And there we go. Now, let's get to listing. Coming in 10th place, we have the War Bear Riders. These are the landmark unit of the Kislev roster, and not just because they're actual bears, but also because they're one of the 3 non-hybrid weapons units in the entire roster. They may only have a small number of entities, but they make each one count. They're incredibly tough with very high armor and plenty of health per entity. Their speed is fast enough to keep up with most standard heavy cav, so they will have no problem getting around enemy lines and charging whatever they set their sights on. Their melee stats are decent with a lot more attention on attack than defense, which is a little bit of a shame. Sure, they'll land a lot of hits, but with hitboxes this large, they'll also take a bunch of damage even with all that armor. The weapon strength here is of course the real hero with a bunch of armor piercing and bonus versus large, meaning they can beat almost any other cav they come up against and be especially deadly to monsters when charging the front lines. That high attack combined with this gives them very high damage output that can shred most units in moments, even if they do take quite a few hits along the way. Lastly, their charge isn't the best, but with plenty of mass they can still make an impact, even with their smaller numbers. Overall, I'd still call them a sustained combat cav, just one that you need to keep working with other units to make sure they don't get caught out by their lack of defense. If we're ranking these units on style, then bears would be pretty near to the top, but since we're going on actual combat prowess, 10th place still ain't too bad. Next up we have the Horned Ones, going over to Lizardmen for their top of the line cav unit. They are still plenty tough with very high armor, a bronze shield and mid defense, so any and all damage will have to work very hard to get to their HP. They see a nice increase to their leadership as well as being a little bit quicker to help them get around the map that much faster. Their attack drops by 1 as well as quite a lot less weapon strength, but you have to remember that we're dealing with 3 times the entities here, so even if each one isn't hitting as hard, there's a lot more of them. Lastly, they have a little bit better of a charge as well as their primal instincts, making it a lot harder for enemies to hide from them. Overall, these are a more well-rounded cav unit than the bears and close to what an actual cav unit is. Bears are great and all, but they're essentially monsters with riders. These are a proper cav unit and do that job excellently. Even with their low charge, their best use would still likely be a shot cav since that low defense can spell their doom if they get stuck in combat versus anything with some serious damage. Against backlines, by all means leave them fighting, but if they're charging proper melee infantry, keep them on the move to keep them alive and you should have a much better time of things. Next we have the Demoggri Knight, sticking with some more large monstrous cav, but this time we're going to their empire. Now, for years, I've heard that halberd Demoggri Knights are so much better than regular Demogryphs, I just don't see it. Less melee stats to gain some anti-large bonus don't seem worth it to me, but the base unit is still pretty rad. They're extremely tough with very high armor, bronze shields and mid defense. Just about anything that comes their way is going to have a hard time against their HP bars, and that's never a bad thing, especially in expensive cav. Their speed is pretty on par with endgame cav, and their attack ain't half bad either. Combine that with some pretty tasty armor-piercing weapon strength and a hefty chunk of charge bonus, and they can deal some pretty devastating damage when they hit the battlefield. With this charge and their halfway decent melee stats, they work great as either a cycle charging cav or sustained combat, depending on what they're going up against. If it's front lines, then they might need some help to take aggro so they can stay healthy, but otherwise they're great pretty much anywhere on the map. They're just a super solid all-around great cav unit that welcome in my army anytime against any faction. We're going now to some much more traditional cav with the Dragon Princes. These are of course the top of the line high elf shock cavalry, and they're pretty top if I do say so myself. They still have excellent armor and a bronze shield to keep them safe from any and all damage coming their way. This isn't even mentioning the physical and fire resistance, making them incredibly tanky to pretty much every form of damage. They also have exceptionally high leadership and also excellent speed, especially for something so tough, meaning getting around to flank and charge from any direction is a piece of cake even against other cav units. They are dropping some melee stats from the Demoggryphs, and their weapon strength isn't quite as great or armor piercing, but they're more than making up for it with that charge bonus. This is a huge boost to their damage when they first make impact, meaning cycle charging is absolutely the way to go for maximum carnage. Not only will this crush enemies' health and spirits, but it will also keep them nice and safe, as practically nothing will be left standing to hit them once they land in combat. Against backlines, sure, they might be alright to stay fighting for a little while, especially while the martial mastery melee boosts are working for them. But against front lines, charging all the way. Yes, it's more work, but the rewards far outweigh the difficulty of using them. Just keep them on the move and watch the kills climb. Just missing out on the top 5, we have these Skull Crushers of Khorne. Going back to something a little bit more monstrous, and these are one of the scariest looking cav units in the game, and spoilers, their stats tend to back it up. They're sporting some of the heaviest armor we've seen so far, alongside a bronze shield and some spell resistance to keep them defended against almost anything that comes their way. Their speed isn't the greatest, but when you're this chunky, it's kinda to be expected. Melee stats, however, are pretty top tier, with really great attack and defense for this kind of unit. Add on that frenzy and they become outright fabulous in the attack department. Combine this with their excellent weapon strength, bonus versus large, and very respectable charge bonus, and wherever they find themselves fighting, it's gonna have a very bad time indeed. With stats like these, you can either use them for cycle charging or sustained combat. Of course, with charge bonus like that, cycle charging will likely be the most efficient method of dealing damage, but sustained combat won't be too bad either as long as they don't get surrounded. So while the impact of their charge is meaty, it can take them a while to get into position to pull them off. Regardless, set them up for a big charge at the start of battles, let them land like the hammer they are, and don't stop hitting until everything is dead. Coming to the halfway point, we have the Iron Fist Crushers. Going for something even more monstrous, with monster units being ridden by monstrous infantry, for one of the heaviest cav units in the game. This somehow managed to match the armor of the Skull Crushers and even bring along a shield, and with a hitbox like that, they need it. They're back up to standard cav speed, so even with that extra girth, they can get around the battlefield with ease to attack wherever needed. Their melee stats are both respectable, meaning sustained combat against less damaging foes is absolutely on the table, especially once you factor in that extremely high armor piercing weapon strength. Lastly, their charge bonus is also pretty fantastic, so cycle charging is another very valuable use for these chunky boys. I would say backlines are fine for sustained combat, but as soon as you go near the front lines, cycling will be the way to go for maximum damage and minimum risk. Hitboxes like these make them easy to focus down, so keeping them on the move is the way to go when any sort of enemy damage is involved. With their girth, they should be able to plow through just about anything they come up against with ease, so as long as you make sure they can pull themselves back out, they will do some exceptional work. Next up, we have Great Stag Knights. These might seem like a bit of a strange addition to this list, since at first glance, they don't seem all that special, especially compared to the other ridiculous stat cards on this list. But trust me when I say that by the time I get to the end, everything will become clear. So, from the top, their armor is pretty mid, with a bronze shield and some physical resistance, so they're tough-ish, but not the hardest nut we've had to bust on this list. Their speed, however, is phenomenal, and not only the fastest unit we've seen so far, but can also rival some flying units, which is no mean feat. Getting around the battlefield to attack literally anything you want will be no problem, no matter how far away that target may be. Melee stats are a little bit lackluster, so sustained combat against practically anything is off the table. Weapon strength, however, is a very respectable armor piercing, and that charge bonus is pretty top notch, even if it's not quite the highest we've ever seen. So, why does this unit with decent but not crazy stats make it so high in this list? Well, it all comes down to one thing. Woodsman. This little trait means that unlike almost every other cav unit in this entire game, they can move through forests without being slowed down. So if enemies are hiding in trees to avoid cav charges, these guys can get to them fast and hit them full force. You want to pull off an ambush of your own, hide in those trees and rest easy, knowing they'll be at terminal velocity by the time they make impact. Trees are the kryptonite to pretty much all large units in the game, as normally they get substantially slowed down, making them worse at every job they can do. These guys can totally ignore that and are also pretty great units, so they're absolutely deserving of a place on this list. Coming in third place, we have the Doom Knights of Tzeentch. Honestly, having these guys on this list feels a little bit like cheating since they are technically cav, but that technically is doing some serious heavy lifting to keep them legal. They're dudes on discs, but they're classed as cav by the game, so fair game for this list. Anyway, for their stats, they're super tough with extremely high armor and the first silver shield we've seen yet. Add on that Barrier of Tzeentch and they're going to take a whole lot of work to take down, no matter how you do it. Of course, since they're flying, they're absurdly fast and obviously top the list as far as speed is concerned. Wherever you need these guys, they will get there, not only with their extreme speed, but also the ability to fly, mean they don't have to worry about going around enemies either. Melee stats are decent, but nothing too crazy, with attack being a lot better than defense, but to be fair, could you block attacks while standing on a flying Roomba? Weapon strength is also nothing crazy, especially without a ton of armor piercing, but with magical damage, they'll get the job done versus any resistances, no problem. Lastly, they have a moderate amount of charge bonus, so they'll land with a decent enough impact. These are more of a backlines terror cav. With their lack of major armor piercing, they're best suited for getting into ranged and artillery units and wiping them out no matter where they try to hide. The real draw of these guys is the speed, flight, and just how elusive they are. They're super tough and have a relatively small hitbox, making them damn hard to take down no matter how you do it. Just keep them on the move, picking apart enemies from the skies, and they should put in some serious work. Coming in second place, we have the Blood Knights. My vampire counts don't have a lot going for them, but the Blood Knights are an exception. Since launch, they've been pretty top tier, and time hasn't worn that down. Nice thick armor and a bronze shield, so plenty tough alongside the Flag of Blood Keep, which is just missile resist. Mid leadership and undead, which is one of the worst effects in the game, as we mentioned every episode in Old Grumblers, but I digress. High standard speed for Cav, decent melee stats, especially defense, shockingly enough. Now, I won't dream of using these for sustained combat, but that defense should keep them safe from the small number of swings which do come their way, which I have to appreciate. Weapon strength isn't the most armor piercing, and they of course have that anti-large bonus, making them one of like 3 units in the entire Vampire Counts roster with some, so tagged in any monsters or other large units you can will go a long way to helping your army get the dub. And of course the crowning stat is their charge bonus, which may not be the highest we've seen, but is still very respectable and elevates their otherwise mid damage to being pretty damn great. As long as they keep moving and cycling into units for maximum damage and minimum risk, you can't go wrong. But that's not all. We also have Frenzy for some added attack and damage output whilst they're healthy, and the real best part about them, the hunger. Whenever they're in melee, they'll regen HP, meaning any fighting they do, they'll only really be getting stronger no matter how much damage keeps coming back to them, since it can be so hard to deal any damage to them whilst they're constantly moving in and out of combat. Add on their very high toughness to all damage and some regen, and even if they take some hits, the moment they hit melee, it'll be undone in moments. Without regen, they're honestly probably a little bit average, but it's just one of the greatest abilities a unit can have, and it elevates them to second place on this list. Again, call it undead bias all you want, but I love the vampire counts and I think the Blood Knights are bloody fantastic. And finally, in first position, we have the Grail Guardians. As much as it pains me to admit it, the Bretonnians really are the king of cavalry, and topping the list with any other faction just felt wrong. And don't get me wrong, the Grail Guardians would win no matter what faction they came from, but Bretonnia is just so stocked with great cav units that you could argue that they should have like 5 units on this list alone. Anyway, onto the stats. We're kicking off with very high armor and a bronze shield, as well as 15% flat damage resistance from the Blessing of the Lady, making these boys extremely hard to take out. Their leadership is nearly unshakable, and they're exceptionally fast for such beefy boys. Now, the melee stats are where they really come into their own, with nice enough attack, but absurdly high defense for a cav unit. These lads are sustained combat cav through and through, and their defense combined with their overall tankiness will keep them alive fighting against even the toughest melee infantry for a very, very long time. Add on their very tasty armor-piercing weapon damage, and they can dish out a bunch of punishment at the same time as avoiding enemies. Lastly, they do have some decent charge bonus, so even if you're not using them to cycle, they'll hit combat with plenty of punch to kick things off, moving in the right direction. Add on some perfect vigor, and they're going to hit combat, tear whatever they find to pieces, and stick around for a very long time. Now, do they have the highest damage output of any cav unit? No. In fact, the Grail Knights likely have them beat in almost every aspect. However, the ease of use for these guys is unbeat. A literal novice to the game can pick these up, charge them straight into an enemy army, and get great value with no other orders than that. That makes these the best cav units in the entire game. Just set them and forget them as they rack up value and keep themselves alive against all odds. That's my list. Did I miss any units that you think should have made it? Let me know in the comments down below. Like, subscribe, and if you want more Warhammer 3 top 10s, then why not check out this video here for the top 10 generic lords in the game.